It is a question asked again and again in the aftermath of the financial crisis of 2008. Why have no high-level executives been prosecuted for their role in the collapse? It was asked at the Oscars by Charles Ferguson in his acceptance speech for his documentary Inside Job.
Not a single financial executive has gone to jail, and that's wrong.
A front-page piece today in the New York Times calls it a financial crisis with little guilt. Joining me now from the New York Times newsroom is Gretchen Morgenson. She co-wrote the piece today with Louise Story. I am pleased to have Gretchen Morgenson back on this program. Welcome.
Thank you, Charlie.
So tell me how this originated. I mean, for all of us who have spent a considerable time since 2008 interviewing people about this crisis, whenever you would ask the question, there was never a great answer. Or a great analysis. Go ahead.
Yeah, you know, what you hear is these are complicated cases, they're paper cases, there's no victim, quote unquote. It's not like a murder case where you have a body. And so there are, you know, those kinds of legal rationale that you hear. But it was so unsatisfying, Charlie, because here we have, whatever, name your number, hundreds of billions, $1 trillion in losses, and nobody's fault. That's hard to believe. So people are relentlessly asking this question, and with justice and with the right to do so. It's what people want to know. It's just, it seems morally wrong.
Is it largely a matter of a difference between criminal behavior and unethical behavior?
Well, it's hard to believe that you didn't have criminal behavior in a circumstance that hurt so many people as this situation did. It's hard to believe that there was no fraud conducted here when you have so many losses, hundreds of billions of losses. I think that's the suspension of disbelief that people have trouble with. And so, you know, okay, you've got brokerage firms selling things that they know may fail. You've got lenders making mortgages that they know cannot be repaid. You know, I am not a lawyer and don't pretend to be one, but it's hard to maintain that there was no fraud here.
But you talk to a lot of people who know why there have been no prosecutions, and when you say to them, it's hard to believe there's no fraud here, what do they say to you?
Well,
other than complicated.
This is where we then get into the reporting that Louise and I did on the story in today's paper, and that is that while the mortgage crisis was accelerating, the mania was going on, and then after it broke, there was very little work done by the regulators on the front lines to create cases, to bring referrals to federal prosecutors, to really amass the kind of information that you need to bring these cases successfully. And this is in direct contrast to what went on in the S&L crisis in the late 80s and early 90s.
Where people went to jail.
Where people went to jail. 800 some went to jail. There were 1,100 criminal prosecutions. And we were talking about a much smaller circumstance, Charlie, a sort of regional disaster. You know, the Southwest was where it really was focused. And so here we have an international crisis, much huger in scope and size, and, you know, no criminal prosecutions of any high-profile people.
So what's the significance of the meeting you described between Tim Geithner, now the Secretary of the Treasury, then head of the New York Fed, and later to be, or at that time to be, an important figure in terms of how we respond to the collapse, a meeting between him and the now governor, but then Attorney General, Andrew Cuomo?
I think it's a pivotal moment, Charlie, in the crisis. It's mid-October. AIG has been bailed out. Many of the banks, the TARP has been passed. And this is a moment where the fragility of the system is of highest priority. And so looking back at that moment from, you know, 2.5 years hence, you ask yourself, yes, we did save the system. That was very crucial and important to be done. And yes, some of the companies are paying back their TARP, and that's excellent from the taxpayer's standpoint. But there are other elements that make people frustrated about the reaction by the government in this case. And so looking at it from the standpoint of prosecutions, yes, we saved the system. Yes, TARP is being repaid, but that is not everything. There is this moral issue of accountability that has just not been addressed, and I think can be quite pernicious.
And will it be addressed?
One can hope. Now, in the S&L crisis, it was a longer trajectory. We did have those criminal prosecutions occur over a longer period of time. We've been in our crisis and the aftermath for what, pick your spot, 4 years, 3.5. So there is more time here, but also the clock is running. The statutes of limitations, can expire on some of these cases, and I think really it would be so helpful, I think, for the Main Street crowd to see some accountability here.
Okay, but I would assume, understanding human nature and politics, that if in fact there were cases to be made, there are prosecutors who know that having the right scalp will take them a long way in terms of a future career.
Definitely, definitely. And here again is where you get back to the regulatory failure, because during the time of the crisis, when the information should have been amassed, when the scrutiny should have been done, when the investigations should have been taken up, there was no one doing that. And so you have a situation with a Countrywide Financial or an IndyMac, which failed spectacularly, where your regulator, the Office of Thrift Supervision, was literally considering these banks its constituents, people that it wanted to keep happy. This is something you see in the Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations report. The OTS head viewed these banks as his customers, almost, his clients. And so, of course, he's not going to be aggressive about investigating wrongdoing, digging into the practices and identifying the problematic ones.
So what about the FBI and other law enforcement agencies?
Yeah, we have an interesting bit in the article about how initially in, I think it was 2008, there was a memo that was prepared by the FBI to get more resources to go into these kinds of investigations. And it was agreed to, it was sent out to all the field offices, and then shortly after discussions with the Department of Justice took place, it was rescinded, the plan was changed, and those resources were not applied.
You say you believe something may take place? I mean, your argument is that eventually something might happen?
I'm hopeful. I have no reason to believe. There's no case that I know of that is being prepared as we speak. But I think that everyone understands. I think that people at the highest level in Washington understand that there is this deep suspicion about the fact that there have been no prosecutions, and I would hope that they would respond.
If somebody was going to respond, who would it be? The Attorney General?
The Department of Justice, certainly. As you point out, an aggressive United States attorney somewhere. Pick up a case, try to make a name for him or herself.
All right. Let me turn now to the bipartisan report that was released by the Senate. What does it tell us we didn't know?
You know what, Charlie? It's very, very interesting and good reading because it fills in blanks, it gives color, it fills in some missing pieces of the puzzle. It isn't, incredibly revelatory, but it is very, very helpful to give you the three-dimensional look at this crisis. It goes into great depth on WAMU, which was a huge failure, and the aggressive lending practices there. It goes into very, very good detail about the regulatory failure at the Office of Thrift Supervision. It goes into tremendous detail on Goldman Sachs, but also Deutsche Bank, which we had not learned much about prior to this report, and does a pretty good job on the credit rating agencies as well. So it's four dimensions, and there's a lot of very good color, good emails, very readable, very succinct and cogent.
In your and so to what end will this report serve?
Well, they hope, the people who wrote the report, prepared it, hope that they've made 19 recommendations. They hope that some of those will be taken up by regulators who are now hammering out, of course, the Dodd-Frank rules and regulations. I think also they do hope that there might be some criminal referrals or criminal actions that take place as a result of what their findings were.
When you look at the financial sector today, how is it doing?
It's doing very well. It's doing very well. It's bigger than ever. The largest banks control more assets than they did ahead of the crisis. Too big to fail is alive and well, unfortunately, and we are having a concentration in the industry that I think is troubling, because it means that when one of these large and politically powerful and interconnected companies gets into trouble again, the taxpayer will have to foot that bill.
So they are too big to fail.
They are too big to fail, and if we learned anything in this crisis, it's that they were going to get a bailout, and that has not changed going forward, even under Dodd-Frank, even with the resolution provisions of Dodd-Frank. There is nothing that is breaking these banks down in size, and so they continue to threaten the taxpayer.
Gretchen, thank you.
You're welcome,
It's always
Charlie.
good to see you.